either. Welcome back to episode 340 of the Tall Boy Radio podcast. And as we always say, who knows where it goes when the beer flows? Well, that beer is flowing in an interesting direction tonight as we are joined by an author. But before we get to her, we're going to say hello to Gaz.
Yeah, evening all. I hope you're well out there in listener land, and I hope this wonderfully sunny Sunday evening is treating you well. Obviously, it might not be sunny and it might not be Sunday when this episode drops, but it is for now, and we're enjoying the sunshine. So looking forward to this and can't wait to get going.
Indeed, indeed. Now, before I introduce our guests, I want to say hello to a number of new countries because they've been piling in again and we really, really appreciated it. So there's 9 new countries tuned in since last week. So hello, Macedonia, Mauritius, Paraguay, Angola, Belize, Botswana, the British Virgin Islands, Nicaragua, and Honduras. That takes us up to 124 countries. That's pretty impressive, dude, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and you know what? The more the merrier. And as we always say, when we get some new countries and listeners from existing countries, we thank you wholeheartedly for spreading the word, spreading Tall Boy Radio across the globe. And it won't be long until we're running the place, hopefully.
I'm not so sure about that, but who knows? We'll find out. We'll find out soon enough. But we have a guest. We have a guest who's written a book, who's written a number of books, actually. So, Victoria, did you want to say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm Victoria L Schultz. I'm a Gothic steampunk author and multimedia artist, and I am just delighted to be here with you all today.
Oh, it's an absolute honor. It's an absolute honor to have you on the podcast today because you're a big fan of reading as well, aren't you guys?
Yeah. I'll be absolutely honest. The genre that we're going to talk about isn't something that necessarily I've sort of read. I'm aware of the genre as such, the sort of sub-genre as they say. But yeah, I mean, I love books. I love literature. I sort of fiction, I suppose, as opposed to sort of real life and stuff. But yeah, I love reading. Read all the time.
Indeed. Now, like Gaz says, I'm not all that familiar with it either. So for a start, so you write on a number of genres. One of those is steampunk. So did you want to tell us a little bit about what exactly is steampunk?
So in a nutshell, what we call like a lag line or log line is steampunk is new Victorian science fiction. It can include things like time travel, things of science fiction nature. You can even include some more fantasy elements, but generally you want to think of the age of innovation with the Gilded Age and the Victorian era mixed in with a lot of fun science fiction.
Wow. Yeah, so it's interesting. So back in the day, myself and the fellow to my left here, we're geeks. And we did a little bit of role playing, the old Dungeons and Dragons stuff. And one of the things that we did was Space 1889, wasn't it? Your brother used to, was a big proponent of. And that, I believe, was that kind of thing. So it was Victorian age, but we'd moved it on in years. And what had happened if electricity or what have you hadn't been invented? Everything was steam powered. And it was pretty interesting stuff. So you've written a number of novels, one of which I have in my hand here. I don't even see that there, Embrace of the Dark. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this book then? I must confess, I did promise you I was going to try and read it before, and I've been quite busy this week, and I unfortunately haven't had a chance to. But I do have it to read, hopefully before the end of next week.
I know, isn't that fun always trying to find time to read, especially when you're an author? To find time to read other stuff makes things interesting. But that series, the Vermilion Countess series, I just love it. It is my favorite character. The main character is Stella. She is a Polish countess. She's a 300-year-old cougar, vampire, assassin with a repressed memory who suddenly starts to remember her past.
Oh,
well, there's a lot to go out there.
There is.
I'll be honest with you, I wasn't expecting quite that, but yeah, there's a lot to go. I mean, if I'm honest, like this sort of, I suppose the sort of vampire genre again is something that myself and Beans have a sort of intriguing, and as Adam said, when back in the day when we went through our sort of geeky phase, we were sort of into the sort of vampire genre to a certain extent. I mean, I haven't really sort of read a lot of sort of vampire novels as such. Obviously, Bram Stoker and Dracula and all that. You sort of read the big ones and that you know about, sort of thing. But yeah, wow, there was a lot to go out there. So what was the inspiration for that character then? What's the inspiration for making her that way?
I wanted to do something with a character that was totally different. I had the stereotypical kind of steampunk and vampire paranormal characters before this. And I am a dreamer. I have a wild, vivid imagination. And the vampires are hot again. They're kind of trending again. And, Anne Rice's interview with the vampire is hot again. And I thought, I really want to do a spy series, an assassin. But I started playing with the idea of what if she can't remember? And all of a sudden she starts remembering. And, she's an assassin. So how many of these people has she run into that, and yeah, you see this in the books, she starts running into people she's known before, maybe hundreds of years before in her business. And of course, being a spy and assassin, you have to be incredibly careful. And to make things more complicated, she's in love with her handler, who happens to be human and about 10, 15 years younger than her.
Wow. So explain to us then, handler then. Well, why would you need a handler? I mean, I'll put for myself, but
So as of course, he does not know she is a vampire. She has just been brought in, she's very specialized at what she does. And she realizes as she's remembering, she has to do these special things. She needs a contact to the government or this secret society. And so they give her the basics and she runs with it. She, to protect herself and her handler, doesn't know the other things that go on in the background. She's all in the front, taking care of business. And so she needs that handler as an interim between her and the government or the society that she technically works for.
Okay. So how do you go about then? Because again, there'll be people out there that might be familiar with the vampire genre. There'll be potentially some of our listeners might not be. How do you sort of frame the story just in terms of then the daylight hours as opposed to the nighttime hours? And is that something that you sort of go into in your book, or again, if you just let sort of strip it back almost for our listeners, just to sort of explain the daytime, nighttime sort of thing with the vampires?
Yeah, with my version of vampires, they can be daywalkers or be out in the daytime, however, not for long periods of time, and they can't take heat for long periods of time.
Right.
So, during the daytime, she will be a lot in like clouded limousines, inside buildings. She'll wear sunglasses all the time. Particularly, you'll find later on, she wears rose-colored sunglasses a lot, or red-colored sunglasses a lot. There's other like stereotypical things that do happen, though, that yes, wood or stakes to the heart will kill you. Sunlight won't, but it will definitely, deter your powers. But again, a stake to the heart, a cutting off of the head would kill a vampire. I mean, that's how she has to assassinate other vampires that she comes in contact with. But she does handle the daylight just, in small increments. Yeah.
It's interesting. I think when you first hear about writing a story, okay, whenever you try and write something for yourself, the first thing that people say to you is, you write about what you know, what you're familiar with, and then that's how you manage to get it out, and you get it on paper and you take it from there. How did you get involved with writing this kind of story then, if you don't mind my asking?
It goes way, way back. I was really fortunate to grow up right next to my primary school. So if you're not familiar with the United States, when you're about 6, 7 years old, you enter what you call primary, your first education. And it's generally grades like 1 through 4 or 1 through 6, depending on your school system. I was really fortunate that that school was literally next to my neighborhood. So I had access to what they call a bookmobile, and it was a mobile library. And they would pull up, and my older brother would take me over, and he got me into all this wild sci-fi reality stuff, UFOs, ghosts, vampires, things like trying to think of some other things, the Loch Ness monster, Bigfoot. But my favorite thing was the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall. And I remember seeing, if you don't know the Brown Lady, Lady Dorothy Walpole was believed to be the first ghost, and she's from your lovely country. She was believed to be the first ghost caught on camera. And what had happened was the current Viscount at the time, and this is the early 1900s, I want to say, I believe it was 1926 or 36, Country Life magazine had come out to Raynham Hall, and this is the Townsends, the Viscount Townsends, and to take pictures of the home for this magazine, a life and style magazine. And they were setting up a camera on the main staircase, and this figure comes down, and it's vivid, and they could see it, and they photographed it. And she is one of the most famous ghosts. So that was really inspirational to me to get started into this thing. Again, my brother got me involved in all kinds of other things, including storm spotting, which I do still today, but ghosts, vampires, and we watched spooky movies when I was a kid. And this just all really fueled my wild imagination.
Cool. So were you interested in not just fiction, but ghost hunting as well?
Yes. I actually today still work with paranormal investigators. I have been in several very haunted houses in the St. Louis area. For those of you watching who are not familiar with America, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. We're about the middle of the country. So if you think, United States, almost smack in the middle. And it's a very haunted city. We're one of the top 5 haunted cities in the United States. And I actually lived in a historic house museum that was also haunted, and wrote a fictional book based on my time there. Of course, it was more of like, not exactly a bodice ripper, but it had some Gothic romance to it. So I've been really fortunate to, yes, I still work with paranormal investigators and have gone and used the meters, used the little gadgets, and I've seen a lot of things. I heard things. I had a voice whisper in my ear before. I'm all about the ghosts and the spooky.
Wow, that's cool.
That is cool. Yeah, that is cool. What was the name of that book then that you wrote? I'll definitely have to get my hands on that.
Yeah, so that's called She Plays for Ghosts. And that came out last fall. And I'm in the middle of redoing, I just redid the cover, and we're re-releasing the paperback, and it is on sale. And all of my books are available on all platforms. I'm widely indie published. So I publish, again, I have control of my little publishing empire. So it's on Amazon across the world. If you're familiar with Barnes & Noble, Nook, all the ebooks are everywhere. And you can even order books wholesale if you were like a little shop, or you had your own bookstore. So that'll be coming through the Fair app shortly. But something you might find fascinating, that museum, the Campbell House Museum, is Robert Campbell, the original proprietor or owner of that museum, was part of Clan Campbell, the fabulous Campbells, the Duke of Argyll, again, in your neck of the woods. So he was a descendant. Yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. That's incredible. Funny enough, I've just ordered myself, I'm a little bit behind the times. I've just ordered myself a Kindle so I can make it my life a little bit easier, because sometimes we've been caught out when I order books from authors and then they don't turn up for about 3 or 4 weeks and we've already recorded the episode. So I've got myself an e-reader, so it's a little bit more instantaneous now. So I'll have the books to read beforehand, or not read, as is normally the case, because I have 2 young children who normally prevent me. What about yourself? What do you make of that, Gaz? Because you and I have got a bit of a interest in ghost hunting, haven't we?
Yeah, we do. And we guested on a podcast. I think it was sort of earlier this week, really. And again, we were talking about sort of ghosts and personal experiences of the supernatural stuff. And again, it's something that myself and Beans I have, we loved for years. I mean, we're sort of 52 now. Go back sort of. We're nearly 53. Actually, I could have said that. But go back sort of, I say 30 years, 35 years almost. The ghost stories, the supernatural, the things that are bumping the night has always sort of, I say, fascinated us really. And we sent sort of calling cards out round the local town. We were Pickford and Dickinson parapsychologists. And a long story short, and again, apologies to our listeners if you heard this, but we were at college, and we were at college together, and we had this space on our timetable, and they said, right, it's for something that you want to do and you're interested in. So we were like, well, just give us a room and can we do parapsychology? Not for 1 minute thinking that they would say yes, and they did. And they said yes. So we were like, okay, so right, shit, now what do we do? And we basically didn't do a great deal, I'll be absolutely honest with you. But yeah, so from that moment, we were like, well, we need to sort of investigate stuff that goes bump in the night. And we had these sort of calling cards sort of made with our name on. Unfortunately, Beans put his mum's home phone number on there, and obviously she was like, right, you've got to go back and take them all down, because she was convinced she was going to get phone calls about things that go bump in the night, sort of thing. But ever since then, really, we've loved it, don't we? It's definitely a genre that we feel as though we're relatively knowledgeable about, we can engage with. So you absolutely hit the nail on the head there. I mean, that's absolutely in our wheelhouse.
Amen. Yeah, amen. Anyone who went to college with us, even though it was 30 plus years ago, still refers to us as the Ghostbusters.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love it. Did you ever see anything or run into anything, if you don't mind me asking?
No, we've had a couple of experiences, not while we've been investigating or studying or consulting, because we were investigators / consultants. But no, we had a couple of experiences in some older buildings, and we one of the reasons why we guested on this podcast was share some of the experiences that we'd had. But I don't want to be talking about us. I want to be talking about you. So I want to be finding out a little bit now then. So we spoke a little bit about steampunk at the start. You've got an interest in parapsychology there as well. How did you start writing about steampunk? How did that come into your wheelhouse?
I've always been kind of a storyteller. Even as a kid, I told some humdingers. I convinced one of my best friends that I was a fairy and I could grant wishes. And my parents, being very Catholic, grounded me for 2 weeks. They're like, you can't go anywhere for 2 weeks. You can't tell people that you can cast spells and grant wishes. This is not what you're supposed to do. So I always like stories, writing down things. I started my master's degree, and I already had like a big background in like advertising, marketing, and communications. And my communications course, they had us do a lot of writing. And I'd already written some articles and things, but my instructor was like, I know you're an artist and you do all this visual stuff, but you should really be writing. He said, start putting your stories down because they're amazing. Your perspective is really good. I love how you write. And so that was early 2000s. And by 2010, I was kind of puttering around with that sort of thing. And don't feel bad about the age. I'm pushing 60. So I started, it was about 2012 is when I started self-publishing and finally got to that point where I want to put this out there. I think it'll sell. I mean, and more, like you say, you don't want to do things just for the money. I do it because it makes me happy. It makes me insanely happy. I'm so passionate about it.
You can't put a price on that. You really can't. And, that's one of the things that we've said about this podcast is we're not interested in being popular. We don't want celebrity out of it, which is good because I don't think we're going to get it. And but we enjoy it. And even if nobody listened to this podcast, whether there was no countries, rather than the 124 that are kind enough to tune in, we'd do it anyway because we enjoy having the conversations with people like yourself. And I'm just curious then. What was your first book you wrote? What was that about?
The first whole novel I wrote was called Strax and the Widow. It is my first steampunk novel. And it was a real challenge because, again, it was my first book and I wanted to do things a certain way. And I gave it to my first editor, and she was like, boy, you got a lot of work to do. But it is a weird Western. It falls into, it's like a subgenre of the steampunk genre. And Kate Church is the main heroine. She is a young St. Louis teenager, and some bad things happen in St. Louis. And she runs to a Wild West town in Texas. And as she's working for a railroad there, she becomes a gunslinger. And this town, Iris, is full of, strange characters, cowboys, villains, people wanting to take over the town. There's gunfights in the street. But eventually the rail starts dying off and the town starts becoming a ghost town. People want to stay, but most people are leaving. And someone starts to follow her around and sees her talents and starts to recruit her and starts to give her money for doing little tasks. And that's where you start to find that there's a lot more going on in this town than what you think it is.
Okay. Wow.
That
Like the sound of that.
That sounds interesting. That does sound interesting. So what elements make it steampunk then, just out of interest?
So it's in that Victorian Western era. There's some weird gadgets, like she invents a gun that's run by a strange liquid that comes from it's a flammable liquid from these wild cactus plants that are hidden outside the town. And she just happens to find them by accident. They act almost like a flint. And so she uses it to power her gun. And it's just, that's one of the elements with the mechanical things. Of course, you have the railroad, you have spies, and you have gunslingers, and some other mechanical things start happening. And you have a secret society. So those elements kind of bring in all the fun steampunk stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
I tell you what, it's not a genre that I've ever really understood. Now, actually, so near to us where we are, it's a small town called Crewe, and it's not really famous for anything other than its railway station. But they have a steampunk festival every year. And when I used to work in Crewe a couple of years ago, you'd see these people dressed up with the top hats and with the gears and the big glasses and everything on it. I never understood it, but it looked really, really cool. And I certainly hearing what you're telling me about it, I'm a little bit intrigued to explore a little bit about this. What about you, Kessa?
Yeah, again, said at the start, I wasn't sort of overly familiar with the genre as such, and I suppose we're relatively familiar with the sort of the Victorian England and again, if you go back more occult, we read some stuff to do with sort of Cthulhu and things like that. So quite dark, sort of occult stuff, and certainly centered around sort of 1920s. There was stuff going on and there was something like Cthulhu by Gaslight, wasn't it? It was all like underground and hidden in the shadows and this, that, and the other. So we're relatively familiar with that subgenre as such. But yeah, the steampunk for me is not. It sounds cool. Now I know a little bit more about it. I'm like, yeah, that actually is. That does sound cool, but I was quite naive, I suppose. Really, not really knew anything about it. Victoria, I'm absolutely delighted that you're on, because actually it sounds like it's something that I could absolutely get my teeth into as such. You know what I mean?
Yeah, amen.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of steampunk geeks out there. They proudly fly the steampunk geek flag. I dig Victorian history. I've always loved it, and it even goes back to the original Wild Wild West TV show that was here in the United States. Gosh, it started like the year I was born. Okay, so that's dating me. Sorry, but I used to watch it with my dad. I was a little kid, and they're running these reruns, and it's got all these guys in Western gear, and they have these gadgets. It's like James Bond of the Victorian era, and there's hot saloon women, and some of them are villains, and the guys are handsome. The villains are even handsome. Some are creepy. There's shrinking machines, and people get miniaturized, and people get big, and if there's monsters. So it involves all of that. And then, bringing it into like the modern era, some people might remember that Will Smith did the movie with Kenneth Branagh and did the movie The Wild Wild West.
Yeah.
So a lot of people will see that, and some people loved that movie and some people hated it. I liked it. It's not my most favorite movie, but I thought they did a pretty good job of it.
Yeah. And now you've said that, I mean, I've watched the film, and now you said that, and I have a little bit more understanding. Yeah, I can absolutely see that sort of subgenre and that genre of steampunk, because that it is exactly what it was. It was the Wild Wild West, yet it was the Wild Wild West on speed, almost, with like loads of like cool things going on and all that. And just one question really that I have, and you mentioned earlier, you know, you sort of fiction, science fiction. Were you ever sort of an Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov type person? Was that something that you sort of were either into, or did you start and dismiss it? Was there anything that there in that link sort of thing?
Well, as far as like, if you go back to books, it's going to go actually a little more to fantasy rather than sci-fi. I mean, I
Right.
did love Star Wars as a kid, but I also loved, what was I thinking of? Oh gosh, this is fun. C.S. Lewis. I love the Chronicles of Narnia.
Yep.
When I was a kid, they came out with one of the first cartoons they had with that, and I was hooked. I'd read all those books, and a little more like on the romantic side, I was a big like Jane Austen fan. But Star Wars came out, and you have all this adventure, romance, science fiction all in one, and it lit my imagination. I'm not as big of a Star Wars geek, but I do love them. And I did read the first books that came out. But as far as like the science fiction reading, not as much. It's more of the fantasy reading.
Okay.
And again, the real old school stuff, like I said, like the Chronicles of Narnia.
Oh yeah, interesting. I haven't thought we'd be talking about the Chronicles of Narnia.
No.
When I sat down tonight. When it comes to your writing, then, is it important to keep like a basis in reality, or is it purely a flight of fiction?
There is, especially with the vampire stories, this is really funny. I do hear the wildest stories from people about different things, and I end up putting elements of them in the book. One of my vampires, for example, is a doctor. And so he sees a lot of violence. And that way it gives him access to blood, right? And my brother was an emergency medical technician here in the US. And he, the things that would happen, like for a while he worked at a casino, and there was a guy that had a heart attack at the table, and he's riding the guy pumping his heart on a cart out to the ambulance. There was another time a guy swiped a bunch of chips from a table and ran out in a cornfield, and they caught him and they found out he was wanted for murder. Another
Wow.
time, oh yeah, I used to be a club kid. This particular story was just really wild. There was a drunken, disorderly man, and not to laugh at it, I felt horrible. He was really disoriented, sad. He had broken off with a girlfriend and ran out onto a major highway. And unfortunately, people hit him, and of course, he died. The wildest thing is I was coming home from clubbing, being out all night, and this is like 4 a.m, and I see these ambulances and things over to the side. And I didn't, I got home, my brother's car wasn't home, and he was usually working the night shift. And I was eating breakfast, as we often do when we're young and had been out all night, and drinking quite a bit. And my brother waltzed in, and he's like, "Hey, I thought I saw your car pass me on the highway." I said, "Well, we were there. What happened?" And he told me, so this guy got hit. And what just gets wilder is we had a little convenience store up the street, and I go to get, some soda or something to wake me up. And I was like, "Oh, talking to the clerk, did you hear about this accident?" And there's a lady standing in line, and she starts crying. And I said, "Are you okay?" She said, "I hit him. I hit the guy on the highway."
Wow.
And again, it's just these wild circumstances, things and stories I hear or I've been a part of, that end up making it into the book. That's just probably one of the wilder ones. I've had some just again, some ghostly experiences in the museum in particular, the Campbell House Museum in particular. One of the wildest ones was I had just moved in and I was an artist and I had a basket full of glue and tapes and things I use for adhesives. And I'm working on a project and tape comes out and rolls across the floor. And I thought, oh, I shook the table. I pick it up and put it back in. And I'm working again and I'm working on a project and the tape rolls out of the basket and onto the floor again. Like that time I did not shake the table and it's somebody wanted my attention. And we had a cook's light a light in the cook's bedroom that would go off by itself, go off and on. And I'd come home late at night and go into the carriage house where I lived and the light would pop on. So a lot of these things make it into my stories. So there are real elements, emotional elements too. I went through an experience with a true crime person recently, and that is the book St. Louis Lucifer. And there was a lot of anger. And Embrace of the Dark, the book you have, is kind of the precursor to what happened. And I put a lot of anger into, I was finishing 3 and working on volume 4, especially 4. A lot of the anger and resentment and things I dealt with this true crime imposter made it into those books.
Wow. Just, I mean, in terms of when you write in a series, and I'm fascinated by this, and we've had a couple of other sort of authors on, and I asked the question, and you know, if I was to write a book, I've got a couple of ideas, and as everybody has, but my book would probably only last 20 pages because how do you write the filler of it, if that makes sense? Because you know what's going to happen, you know the main plot stuff, and you know that you need this to happen and this to happen and this to happen. But how do you wrap that up into the not necessarily the filler stuff, but how do you expand on that and you make sure the background is in and you make sure the description is in? Was that something that you found quite natural? Did you have to learn that?
I was really lucky that again, being like a prodigy, like when I was about 10, I had the reading comprehension of somebody twice my age. So I was very fortunate in that. English teachers saw that, and so I got bumped up. I got advanced in classes, and so they taught me. I'm half plotting, half pantser, like doing it. I love the term pants, especially in your country.
Yeah.
They call it a pantser, which sounds even more funny. But you go half and half where you plot and you fill. So, I mean, I call them happy accidents where I wasn't planning on putting something in, but I'm like, oh, that would make a great subplot. Something would trigger something and I'll throw it in there. Like, if, for example, Strax and the Widow, I decided she needed a sidekick, and I do a lot of pet portraits, and I was like, oh, it'd be great if she found this disabled dog, and she puts a little electrical cone in his ear so he can hear, and she takes in this dog. So that's like a little subplot. But going back to what you're asking, I do outline, but I like to fill with descriptions and viewpoints to make it a really richly layered story. Some people don't I know some readers, they don't like it if it gets too wordsy. I'm one of those people, though. I mean, they call it flowery language. Sometimes it will be flowery. It will be romantic. Sometimes it'll be very, very dark, depending on the book. I mean, the vampire books, especially, they are considered like dark romance adventures. So sometimes they get really, really dark.
Yeah.
So, I use those extra elements to really flesh it out. So that you're given full characters and full plot lines so that you really enjoy the book.
Yeah. Wow. And it's strange because, I mean, I'm a huge sort of Tolkien fan, and I love Lord of the Rings. He was an absolute genius. But when you start reading the second book and people that aren't as big of fans, they'll say, well, basically, all it is Frodo and Sam go up a mountain, they go down a mountain, they go up a mountain, they go down a mountain, they go up a mountain, but actually for me, like the descriptive bit of it is genius because he paints that picture. And I know that, and that's why I really asked the question, because I know that some people almost feel as though he goes overboard on the filling bit just to try to make you understand the world. And and I'm just curious as to where you lay on that. But yeah, I massively appreciate your sort of answer on that.
Yeah, I mean, Tolkien's really good for that. I know same thing. Some people don't like that flowery language, but he, to me, fills it in such a way it keeps you engaged, and you still want to read it. You still want to know what happens.
Yeah,
yeah. The Two Towers less so. I'd enjoyed that the less of the three books, the Lord of the Rings. But we'll move on from that.
Yeah.
But I also enjoy Tolkien, not quite as much as Gaz. It has to be said. So, in terms of your books, like you said, you plan them meticulously out. So, I'm assuming then you know the ending before you sit down to write. Have you ever come to the point where you've started writing and actually it takes you in a different direction than you'd planned?
Yes. Yeah. Especially with the vampire stories are done in like a series of short stories. And many of those have taken a totally different direction. The new Stella series, 5 that is coming out, I needed her to go on a mission. And it was just going to be a short mission to give you the feel of her relationship with the handler before she remembered her past, what she was like, because she starts to remember things while she's working with him, and it changes her. All of a sudden she remembers everything before World War I. And before that, there was no memories between World Wars I and II. And then she had, of course, all her memories after World War II to the present. So, I'm writing this story. I'm like, well, I need to do something with her that's a mission that'd be kind of interesting. And you're going to laugh. I was watching an old Clint Eastwood movie called Two Mules for Sister Sarah. And I was like, oh, let's have her go undercover in a nunnery where there was a murder. and it turned out to be, and this has got to be a very meaty, centralized part of the story. And I was like, yeah. So I started developing the nun characters, and they're not all saintly. Some of these women were former prostitutes. One was a former drug user. One was actually a woman that had a lesbian relationship with another woman that died of AIDS. And so I was like, wow. And they find out, the bad person, I'm not going to give it all away, but someone's running drugs and guns out of the convent. And so it was like, oh, wow. And that's one of those like happy accidents where I wasn't planning this at all. And now I love that book. And again, that one's coming out at the end of the month on June 28th. I'm really excited. But yeah, there was a pleasant detour.
Wow. And in terms of that then, and being said, do you know the ending, and has that ever sort of changed? If you were writing a series, because again, this fascinates me, is so you write a book and you have the idea of the book, but then the book, did you always feel as though you set the plots out for them to be a series, and you always had in mind the number of books that were going to be in the series and how they were going to be split, as opposed to writing one, finishing it, and then thinking, well, actually, I could carry this on? Was it always a plan to write a sort of series of them?
Yeah, I always like the idea of building like a Marvel DC universe of steampunk characters, and there were going to be a few trilogies with different characters.
Yeah.
And it just kept getting bigger and bigger. And so I have the original trilogy, and I'm finishing the 3rd book of that original trilogy. And then I have 3 other trilogies that the first book of each of those is out. And then I decided, okay, I can't keep writing trilogies. What I'm going to do is these books are going to all converge into one series. And they're all these characters are going to come involved in that, kind of like, Avengers Endgame, where they're all going to come in, and there will be, shoot offs for different books, and the whole series will focus on different characters. But yeah, I started plotting out as trilogies only, but it just got so big. Yeah. That I decided, you know what, we're going to leave the rest of the series open-ended, and we'll just keep writing. And certain characters will come to their ends, I'm certain. I'm not, of course, not going to say which ones, but yeah, I've got plans. The short book series I like because I really can keep it open, but I like the number 3. So I think I might just do 30 of each of the vampire series, the male and the female vampire series. I just like that number. For the male series, I'm on 10 or out. and I have about 5 in progress. For the female series, I have 5. The 5th one will be coming out, and I have like another 5 to 10 in progress. So
Wow.
I'm thinking, I don't know, I might keep going if the inspiration is there, if the demand starts growing, which I certainly hope it does. I'll probably just keep going. I'm also working on screenplays and submitting them as possible, pilot screenplay material.
Oh, wow.
Pretty excited about that. Yeah.
I mean, that, if you excuse me, that sounds like a very sort of busy mind as such. It's like, how do you plan to write a trilogy in a series, but then write one of those, but still have that in your mind, but then start a completely different book with another different trilogy in it? That sounds very busy for me. I'd be like, I'd write that trilogy, finish that one, then I'll write another one. How do you manage that? Do they not all just converge and you almost lose? Well, actually, that's from that book and that's from that book.
It's I keep a lot of notes. I have 2 laptops and a phone and a tablet. So I keep a lot of notes. I've written down. I worked a lot of boring jobs where I had some time and I'd come up with something and write it down. So it is a challenge to keep track, but I do have this wild mind. I do need to rein myself in. I'm fortunate. I'm not on any medications. I do like a glass of wine,
yeah, we all do.
Or a margarita occasionally. But yeah, it's all there, and I do make sure that if I come up with an idea, it does go in a document. I write I use Word documents. Microsoft Word is how I write, and I will definitely plot out the ideas as they come. And I'm like, if I get inspired, I'm okay with jumping over and writing there for a little bit. And that way it keeps me from feeling like I'm confined. I do set deadlines for myself. I'm a much more organized writer than I used to be. And that came with practice. It really did have to practice it and get organized.
And the age-old question, I suppose, and it's the dreaded question that every writer will get: writer's block. Did you suffer from that? Was that something that ever happened to you as such?
Don't hate me. I've never had writer's block.
Oh, wow. Really?
Never.
Oh, wow.
There's always, and see, I am a visual artist too. I do more photography now than drawing. I still do pet portraiture occasionally, but I always have something. There's always a story in my head, a character that wants out, a place that needs to be seen, a story that needs to be told. I have never had writer's block. There's been times I'm too tired to write. I start writing, I'm like, okay, just get the basic, like 3 or 4 points, and I'll fill it in later, just so I wouldn't forget. Like I'll text myself and be like, okay, I got it. Okay, I really need some sleep, kind of thing, But that's what I do.
And in terms of that, you just mentioned that you've always got characters or ideas. Would you ever think of a character and develop a character without really knowing which book it's gone into? You think, well, how can I fit this character in? Or is it always very, you've got your story and almost which type of character you want, or you're very creative, so you'll think of this really way out person, character, background, and then you think, how I've got to get them into a story, into one of my books. Does it work that way around, or do you always know?
I would say it's about 80% I know and 20% I don't know. Okay. I have come up with a few characters, and I'm grateful for my editor, because one time I was working on the 2nd or 3rd of the male vampire series, and she said, you got a thing for bad uncles. And I'm like, I need to go back. And fortunately, again, I'm self-publishing, and I'm like, yeah, let's make that guy a cousin, or let's make that guy a neighbor. Yeah. It's like, yeah. And I didn't even realize it until, fortunately, that was my second editor saw that, and I was like, yeah, I gotta make things a little fresh.
Yeah.
In terms of the characters, then we had a guy, like I said, in the green room at the start. We've had a lot of ex-New York City police officers or LA police officers talk about the books they've written. One of which was a guy called Andrew G. Nelson, and he's written fictional stories loosely based on some of the ideas of the time that he spent in his police career. And one of the things we chatted to him about is making characters likable, and also where sometimes the villains you're you're predisposed to dislike them, but then they have an element that makes you sort of sympathetic towards them. Have you ever built anything like that into any of your characters?
Yeah, that goes to the first Society series trilogy, Strax and the Widow. The second book in that series is called Revenge and Machinery. And you have a head character. She's a woman that has 3 sons. They're all villains, but there's some very attractive qualities about the sons. And of course, some of them are attracted to Kate, the main character. But there are some of them you can see that they're like, they were born into this. They didn't really have a choice to do what they're doing. And one in particular does love Kate dearly. And you kind of feel sorry for him that he's in this position. He's supposed to kill her, but, he's in love with her. And again, he has some redeeming qualities. So what do? And there lies the fun in creating the book, creating the stories around those characters. But I definitely have I was like, oh man, what do I got to kill this person? Or do I want to extend his life a little more? What are we going to do? What are we going to do with these people? Are they going to change sides? I mean, a lot of these people are spies. They're living some pretty dangerous lives.
Yeah.
Just out of interest, how many books have you written now? What's your total?
I'm over, if you include short stories, and I'm in 3 compilations there's like a steampunk compilation. It would be 30 plus.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that is impressive. Absolutely.
It is really impressive. I mean, you
Thank
are.
you.
Just we don't ask you to give away your age. What age were you when you started writing?
Let's see. I started storytelling when I was a kid, and most of that was through pictures, because I would do illustration. I would draw little cartoon characters. But then I would say about high school, again, I had some really good English instructors who encouraged me to, I love what you wrote. And then college, certainly university. Again, I was writing more for advertising, but all those fictional characters were back there. So it took a little while to get going, but by the time I was in my 30s, I was really starting to put pen to paper. By the time I was in my 40s, I was getting there. Got a laptop and I was set up and I was putting books together.
And at what, again, without talking age, at what age or stage, and I don't know whether it's the case now, were you able to then use that as that's what you do, your main income, so you stopped writing and you stopped doing other jobs, and you just became a novelist writing novels?
So that is where I'm at actually now.
Right.
So right now I'm actually only doing contract work. I left corporate America about 2014. I actually worked for a huge conglomerate. My last really big full-time job was I worked for iHeartMedia, and I decided I was done. I didn't want to do it anymore. I didn't like the corporate structure. So I took on smaller part-time jobs, like 3/4 time, working 4 or 5 days a week, and then the rest of the time writing. Right. So my books are really just now, and it's taken a while. You look at the different things that have happened, like universally, of course, here in America, we've got some people that aren't that great in our government, and it's changed some things. And we had COVID, and a lot of those things have slowed me down at different points. And I've gotten to the point where I am ready to focus, and making sure I'm doing 1 to 2 or 1 to 4 events a month. So mostly book signings and getting out there and reproducing and republishing, putting out my whole backlog, making sure they're out, and continuing to do the new work at the same time. It is a challenge, but I'm up for it. I am ready.
But exciting at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's it like doing a book signing then? Getting out to people, with us, you know what I mean? We get some lovely emails of people. We get some quite nasty emails of people sometimes as well.
Right.
But we do get some feedback, and it's great to hear it. And we've been doing this podcast now for 6 years, and we've been recognised once doing it. Me and him were away in Edinburgh, and we got recognised while we were up there, and that was quite nice as well for that. But what's it like getting out there and meeting the people who read your books and signing them for them? That must be fantastic.
It is. It is so much fun. I have to tell you too, again, I'm an odd bird. Have you heard, car wrapping where they wrap your car in vinyl
Oh
and
Yeah.
yeah.
just get pictures. So a little bit off track, but I'll get back to it in a second, is a few years ago, there was a hotel next to the museum. They were having construction done. The fencing fell on my car. And the third time it happened, I said, that's enough. It's all scratched up. You're going to pay for this. And they did. So the car is wrapped in my artwork.
Wow.
And so my photography is from all my book covers and things. So, I'll pull up and I'm in my car and, I come out and I bring my stuff. And I did go to all the trouble. And I'm really grateful here. There are volunteer organizations. I filed the US trademark for the Countess. And so I own the trademark for that in the United States. So getting out there, people are like, "You're the Countess. Oh, you're the Countess." And I'm like, "Yes, it's me." And
Wow.
yeah, that does go back to, again, a little offshoot is my great grandmother was a Polish countess. So I have some blue blood. You wouldn't know it. My dad drove a beer truck. My mom was, worked as a cafeteria lady. I just, so a very blue collar, like, middle class American family. But yeah, that's where the name is from. But when you see people when that happens, it does warm the heart. It makes you, I just, sometimes I'll blush, I'll crack up laughing. There were people, I had a book signing yesterday at an oddities museum, a very local, popular local, but more actually regional, starting to get national. Troy Taylor, he has done a lot of things for the History Channel, big haunted author. You should have him on. And unfortunately, he did have a stroke this week, but I worked with his staff to make sure the event went on. And I was in the museum and had a little slideshow about my current book, and we talked about it. People came. I had an aunt come from another state. She drove 2 hours to come. Another person that was slightly involved in the book, or actually 2 other people. So I had a little crowd, and then I went upstairs, and a guy said, "Oh, I love your car." And I said, "Oh, I'm here for a book signing," and he bought a book.
Wow.
Like, yeah.
Brilliant. So we come on. There must be, when you go to the book signings, there must be one book that sort of people want you to sign more than others. So which is that book? Which is the one that they go, "Oh, can you sign this one for me?"
Right now, okay, I'll divide it up just a little bit. For the steampunk, and it blows my mind, but people love it. It's A Dream of Emerald Skies. That character is a 19-year-old girl who lives in modern day New York City, but dreams of this steampunk city at night called Emerald Skies. People love that book. It's highly rated. They just love it. The other one would be right now St. Louis Lucifer, and that's a true crime imposter novel, and it's based on a true story that actually happened to me, with this guy pretending to be a member of the haunted Lemp Brewery family here in St. Louis. And so it's selling really well. People want this guy exposed. He really is. He is crazy. He is not sane, and he really thinks he's part of these famous families. And I could go on and on, but people are really excited to get that book. So
Wow.
between those two, yeah.
Yeah, cool. I mean, that's definitely the next purchase I'm going to make. Is probably a book, if I'm really honest, I would really, really, really like to read that one. So, in terms of writing, then, just give us some tips. Gaz has always had an idea that he would like to write a book, and I've sat down. I've got an idea for a book that I've started 3 times and done really poorly with. What does your writing day look like, and what tips would you give us in terms of getting our books out there, getting them published, but first getting them written?
Oh gosh, sorry. It's a little dry today. I've got bad allergies.
That's fine.
I find out how you like to write. Some people are old school, pen and paper. I like a computer because I type very fast. And so, I get out my laptop and I write that way. I set aside time. I love to write late at night. There's the dark gothic girl in me. Or part of me that's still a club kid, because I'll put on house music and I'm like going at it. Or
Brilliant.
if I'm writing a love scene, I put on some like smooth jazz, or sometimes it might be heavy, something hardcore though too, depending who's doing what to whom. How dark is the romance going, right? um so it is important to kind of set your mood. I Believe it or not, I write best with music on. I know some people can't do it because they find it very distracting. I like to have noise on in the background, like a TV. Sometimes I'll have a movie I've seen over and over. Um, there's like a Western channel locally that I can pick up, and I'll have Westerns on in the background. Especially with steampunk, that's really helpful. And sometimes it'll give me some ideas and some things with characters that keeps it really fresh. And I set aside, I'm like, okay, I want to get this out today as much as possible. But I don't always have a set like word goal. Some people like that. I don't. My idea is just we're going to write today, and I'm going to, I do have an end goal. Like, I got to get this to my editor by this date.
Yeah.
And my process is, I get my hot tea. I'm a tea lover. I'm a little bit British. I'm related to William Bradford that came over on the Mayflower.
Wow.
So I love my tea, and I have teas based on characters from my books, which is pretty wild. So I get my tea, and if it's later at night, I'll get decaf. And again, the lighting is soft. I've got my laptop, and I start writing, and I let it flow. There is always a time put aside where I know how to edit. That I try to leave for daytime hours on a weekend afternoon where I'm not interrupted. And I start running my edit checks, and I try and get that document as clean as possible before I send it to my editor. The editor I have now is brilliant. She is a Brit as well. Love her to death. And she's at the point where I can just send her stuff to proof. She doesn't need to do heavy editing with me anymore. She knows I'm going to hand her a very clean document. So for new people, I would figure out what you want to write, how you want to do it, and meaning technically how you want to do it. You're going to handwrite, and then some people use dragging software or voice to writing software because it's easier. For people with disabilities, that is a great thing. If you are blind or visually impaired and you have your voice, you can do that software. That makes it easy. It's also people that are new moms or dads, and the kids go to bed. You can't make a lot of noise, but you're like, okay, you got a little voice recorder and you're going around the house while you're cleaning or whatever, or you got to like run out to the grocery store and you're recording, on your phone. I've known people that do that too. So I would find that, make that time, set aside how moody you are. And I'm very gothic-y moody, where I like my low lighting, maybe a candle, my tea, and I'm set. So I would set aside time, figure out how you want to do it, and then the discipline. I'm also a big planner. I have a planner. It's literally every day I write down the 5 or 6 tasks that have to get done that day. I have my weekly tasks, my monthly tasks in the end. So I'm very organized, but I had to get there. And I'm human. I had to get there. I wasn't that way 10 years ago. I am now.
Wow.
Oh, fair play. Fair play. Some solid advice. Some solid advice there. So one of the things I'd like to be, we're approaching the hour mark. I'm not going to let you go just yet. But one of the things I'd like to know, I'll be curious to know your answer to this question as well, guys. But in terms of your fictional characters that you've written and ones that you haven't, maybe that some other people have written about, who's the fictional character you identify with the most?
Oh, Stella. For myself, that my own character, I love Stella. I mean, she is loosely based on my great grandmother being a countess and having these money and things. But the emotional things she feels are based on a lot of things that I feel. Like I said, I put a lot of anger from that one book into her book and her relationships. I am kind of a cougar. I do like the younger gentleman. You don't have to be real young. I mean, I'm not going after, I kind of got like a 15-year limit because I have nephews that are, that are like in their early 30s. So, Aunt Vicky's not going for the fresh out of high school kind of guy.
Love it.
But then, and as far as I like to read, going back, it sounds crazy, but I've always loved the C.S. Lewis characters. I mean, it was like, Aslan, and the way they talked about him was like, I want a lion, and I would just bury my face in his fur, and I'm like, this is the wildest thing. um, and then I'm trying to think, as far as Anne Rice, I do like Interview with the Vampire is probably my favorite book of hers, but my favorite, the Witching Hour. Those characters are, those books go way off crazy. I mean, it gets very science fictioning, and there's ghosts and possessions and stuff. And I love it though, because Anne Rice is right up my alley. And I got to meet her son last fall, Christopher Rice, an amazing human being. Got to go to New Orleans for the second time last year. But I find those characters from The Witching Hour, I love those characters. It's not even that I relate to him. I relate to him that the female lead is very strong, and she's a doctor, and she's very smart. But I also remember that these books were written in the late 70s, early 80s. So some of them are dated in some ways, but I still love them.
That's cool. What about you guys? Are you a cougar?
No, I've been called many things. That not me one of them. I mean, look, I suppose it depends which genre. Really, I've mentioned already. I love Tolkien. I think he was a genius. I love Aragorn. I love as a character. I think he was incredible. He doesn't quite understand who he is or what he's destined to be, and he's a little bit lost. But he realizes he's on this crusade, and he knows he's got to do it, but he doesn't really want to do it because he knows if he succeeds, he's then going to become this person that he's been running away from for so long, and so on and so on. So that character for me is brilliant. I think more real life. I mean, I used to love, sort of Jack Ryan, the Tom Clancy Jack Ryan, who was just an analyst who then, he then got caught up in various things, and then I love back in the day, so Tom Clancy stuff back in the day, and I'm an avid CIA, FBI type. That I love that political intrigue sort of thing, spy genre. So so those two really for me. Like I say, Aragorn for the fantasy and fiction, and more sort of Jack Ryan for the CIA sort of stuff. That'd be cool for me.
So Gaz would like to bury his face into the beard of Aragorn then. Is that
well, stop putting words in my mouth, Adam.
Certainly for me, it's not steampunky, but it is that era. I grew up reading the stories of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and I love Sherlock Holmes. I love Sherlock Holmes. And then probably during my formative years, Sue Townsend's Adrian Mole stories. I don't know if you have those over there in the US.
Yes.
That's cool. They're very, very English stories, but yeah, I'm not necessarily identified with that character, but I find him, I read them again recently, and I bought them, and I passed them on to my daughter, but she's only 9, so I said, you're not allowed to read it just yet, but I would like you to read it because it's a little bit of my youth. And I do believe, actually, they're going to make a TV series again. Yeah, they made the TV series back in the day, and they're doing another one. Yeah, so well worth a watch. So we are round about the hour mark, and I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. It's flown by. I can't believe we are where we are. So before we let you go, though, we need to let you share some links out, and you tell our listeners where they can find you online, where they can find your books, and we'll add some links into our show notes for the audio episode of the podcast so that people can find you just by clicking on it.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. So I am right now creating a hub where everything's in one spot on my website, and that is the Countess Victoria L Schultz. But Schultz is Polish, so it's spelled SZULC or SZ, as you say over there, ULC.com. And you'll be able to click over there and go to the left side, the hamburger or the menu, go down, and it will say books, and then you'll see all the titles of the books. Right now, I've got 2 of the books, but I'm in the process of uploading all of them. And you'll be able to click on which book you like, and each link for each platform will be there. So if you can click on Barnes & Noble, Amazon, iBooks or Apple Books, Google Play Books. Then I do have distributors. There's a company called Books to Read that make my books also internationally viable, even to Italy, Germany, Japan. Amazon does that as well. So you can get all the ebooks there, and the paperbacks you can get through Amazon as well. if you are a little shop or a bookstore, you'll be able to buy my books wholesale from the Fair app, and that's FAIRE, and that's coming in about a month as well. So you can Google my name, and it should, Google the Countess Victoria L Schultz, and I'm everywhere. You're going to see a lot of photography images as well on my steampunk stuff.
Cool. Gaz, you got any questions before we let her go?
No questions, but been fascinated by this episode. Genuinely, like I sort of started the episode not really knowing anything really about the genre, subgenre, and we've gone on this wild ride, and we're talking about Narnia and all weird and wonderful things, which is incredible, and our listeners will absolutely love this episode, because again, one of the reasons why we do it, we try to educate people, and that's why we have, you know, our guests on, and our listeners will absolutely be educated by it. But yeah, I as Adam said, I can't believe it's an hour and just hit an hour and 6 minutes. It genuinely has flown by, and I've genuinely enjoyed this episode. It's been a blast.
Indeed. Yeah, me too. Yeah, so one of the things we do, we always say, like, if we've learned something, then we, you know, that's what we're after, and we think our listeners will enjoy that journey too. So, Victoria, would you like to say your goodbyes to our listeners?
Thank you. I was delighted to be here, and as always, stay splendid.
Great advice, great advice. And if you got the opportunity, be a cougar. And on that note, I will wish you all a good night, and we'll see you next week when we'll be talking about something entirely different altogether. Take care.
Friends around the mic, kicking back, all right. Day turns into night, podcast in the spotlight.